This is the defense of Pastor Sunday Adelaja's dissertation for his master's degree. There has already been a review to those defending their thesis. Congratulations. I urge you, please, not to simply recite the content of your dissertations. You've already written your theses, right? That part is done. The professors and the reviewers will review it. Have reviewed it. So my opening word to those defending their thesis is: don't just repeat what you wrote. You have what you wrote right in front of you. Focus on these points. What was your goal writing this? What is the societal value of your? This is a scientific work, is it not? And a summary of your conclusions. That's all you need to do. The rest will be handled by us. You don't need to restate your dissertation. If we have any questions about it, then we will ask you. Wishing you a successful passing of this task, a successful completion. We begin. And who is the first one to defend their thesis? The first to defend is Adelaja Sunday, according to the list. Thank you. Dear Honorable Head of the State Board, Honorable Members of the State Higher Education Certification Board, Honorable Professors, Honorable Friends, I present to you my dissertation on the topic, the role of the International Communicative Weekly newspaper in the construction of a single European house. Nowadays, it's difficult to find a newspaper or a journal that is not delving into the issue of European unification. This problem of unification is a relevant issue in the mass media not only of European countries, but far beyond European boundaries, with other countries and other regions of the world studying it as well. For an obvious reason, countries in Eastern Europe had earlier displayed no such heightened interest in European unification. However, after the end of World War II and all that came with it, this discussion of unification began to be discussed in Eastern Europe with renewed vigor. Today, we see more foundation for integration, if not across the whole world, than in certain countries and certain regions for sure. Humanity is gradually coming to the conclusion that Earth is our shared value, and that in a public apartment building, the safety of the building supersedes that of the individual apartments. The world is once again learning to return to its former principle of commonality. This principle is foundational, both for today and for tomorrow. That is why the time is now to initiate a more serious discussion on the issue of European unification, or, in a scientific theoretical sense, the building of a single house. It must be noted, this issue is completely multi-layered and very vast, and there is no monograph, as in a study on this specific topic, on the bookshelves yet. Thanks to that, all I had writing this paper were the conclusions that I could come to based on concrete facts, the concepts built to execute this research of this issue. In this case, I'm talking about general literature. If one tried to find, at the very least, one article about the role of the press in the construction of a single European house, then they would only find a chasm-like lack. This is despite the fact that a good amount of material showcase the fact that no problems, big or small, in the European process thus far have been solved without the involvement of mass media. It has a direct influence on the opinions of millions of people. And in order to gain a more complete picture of this process, we turn to culture. That is because the idea of European unification is not at all a new one. In the first chapter of my dissertation, I tell you the history of this idea, about all the attempts to unify Europe before this one. This is not the first attempt at building a single European house. The first attempt to do so before was called French Europe. French Europe was from 1795 to 1814. That was when Napoleon's expedition swept Europe. And we saw that Napoleon, through conquest and military prowess, wanted to unite Europe into a single state. However, this didn't work out. The failure of this attempt brought after it a new attempt, and that was to unite Europe into a single family, but in a peaceful way this time. This attempt was of a peaceful character. That is why the union that formed this time was called a holy one. Not only because it was a peaceful process, but also because in its beginning stages, a major proponent of this unification became the Catholic Church. That means this process was approved by the popes of the times as well. However, this attempt failed as well. The reason it failed was because the people behind it wanted to preserve the dominance of the former political and economical European system on the European continent. So, this attempt received much traction in monarchies, especially countries with kings, queens, autocrats. Excuse me, Sunday. You are expounding your points correctly. It's clear you have a great grasp of your material. Try to expatiate on your dissertation a little bit more closely to its contents, without reiterating them completely. Let us hear your conclusions. Alright, so to conclude. Since the aforementioned process is already in motion in Western Europe, I saw it as justifiable to research periodicals from Western European countries. That includes England, Germany, France, and other states. On the basis of an analysis of scientific studies and literature on the problems involved in the building of a single European house, as well as a specific survey of the system being constructed and a general summary of facts and materials taken from the International Communicative Weekly newspaper, I came to the conclusion that this publication is continually expanding the range of problematics and questions involved in realizing the integration of the European countries of the continent, from the Atlantic Ocean to the Ural mountain range. The efficaciousness of the means and methods of connection between the printed letter and the reality guarantees an effective resolution of this problem, and also a guarantee of forming a consciousness of universal human principles, such as mutual understanding and substantial dialogue, in the minds of millions of people. Of course, we also studied the press of the former USSR to an extent, the journals and newspapers in which the issue of European unification found a big place. And I am also convinced that this dissertation of mine will be of utmost benefit to my country, Nigeria, as well. Because the African continent also has begun... Okay, excuse me. You studied, or at least looked over, the experience and activity of the press in the former USSR. What conclusions did you come to? Yes, these are the conclusions we came to. We studied the press from the 80s decade. We studied newspapers like Abroad, since it publishes the same things that have been published in the West. We compared this publication to the National Soviet newspaper, the one called Izvestia Herald, and the Soviet Culture newspaper. And I discovered that all these newspapers were covering this issue, the issue of European unification, in great detail. This is because the 80s were the time that Gorbachev went to visit West Germany. And the platform of Mikhail Gorbachev was one of building a single European house founded on universal human principles. That is why the contemporary Soviet journalists were thoroughly enlightened about it. And I also want to say that this dissertation of mine, I am confident, will be of utmost benefits to Africa as well, and to my country, which is Nigeria. My country, Nigeria, is a leading country in on the African continent. To her belongs a key role in uniting Africa. After all, the process of uniting a continent has begun in Africa as well. Last year, in my country, Nigeria, a large group of political activists and political statesmen gathered, and they set themselves a goal. And their goal was to unite all of Africa into a single state by 2035, by the year 2035. They, of course, are following in Europe's footsteps. So, while I was writing this dissertation, people would ask me, how come you are covering European unification? Why not African unification, for example? Well, because Europe took the first step, and that is why we should study the European experience so that Africa does not fall into the same potential pitfalls as Europe. That is why I studied the European unification model and extrapolated that onto Africa, which is also trying to unite right now. I want to hope that this dissertation, which is the first time that this topic is being explored in the International Journalist Department, but also in the Journalist Department in general, will be a start to a future research on this all too interesting topic, which will soon become an important orientation, not only for Europe, but for the whole world. I hope that we will study them in detail. Thank you very much. Okay, questions, please. I have a question. The name of your dissertation is called "The Role of the International Communicative Weekly Newspaper in the Building of a Single European House." This is my question to you. What is the thought process behind the word choice, communicating newspaper? That is a really good question, sir. I also thought reading that I need to look at different sources to highlight the issue of European unification. And that is why I read some Western European publications. But the International Communicative Newspaper Weekly is the name of the French newspaper. Here, I will show you. It's the title of the newspaper. And this newspaper, which releases it in France, has a focus on communicative problems in Europe and the role of communication in Europe. And since my dissertation is on the role of journalism in European unification, and most of my information came from the International Communicative Newspaper Weekly, that is why I decided to use its title in the name of my of my thesis. So I think that the use of this newspaper was the most fitting. But how does that make sense? Communicative newspaper. Isn't every newspaper a communicative channel? Yes. So why the word communicative newspaper? Every newspaper communicates something. That's like saying a journalistic newspaper. Every newspaper has journalists. Yes, I understand. However, that's just the title of the newspaper I decided to use. I can't change the title on a whim. I have a question. On the 43rd page, there's a conclusion you come to that says that East and West, as a description of geopolitics and the interactions between two states, is becoming obsolete. That's an interesting conclusion. But even looking at what's going on around us, even in Belarus, where a new government's social organization has formed, which is divided into the East jurisdiction and the West jurisdiction, doesn't that mean that? Don't you think that this fact that you have stated is? Don't you think that this fact of West and the East being used so widely today contradicts the conclusion you have come to? Yes, East and West is of course a term still in use today, but they are in use in a geographical sense. But if you read the dissertation work, I am talking about in a political sense. Because especially during the time of the Cold War, the world was split into East and West, and journalists, politicians, anyone interested used the terms East and West as if they were the most simple and foundational terms to describe the world. However, now the Soviet Union has fallen, the Cold War has finished, and it's becoming harder to identify what identifies the West and what identifies the East. Now there's no Soviet bloc. Now there's no socialist community. So, in a political sense, the terms of East and West have lost their power. But doesn't the fall of the East mean that the West will become much stronger in the political sense? I think the word will continue to be used. Also, on another page, there's this conclusion. There's no doubt that Germany will be at the center of a future European unification. But then on the 75th page, you say, that said, the idea of renewed French dominance in the European sphere has also garnered a little bit of discussion. And this is from a French publication. So you are favoring Germany as the center of this new European unification. However, this is a French publication you have taken all of your information from. Well, I was looking at statistics while I was writing that, and when I was writing this last November, the two Germanys had just reunited. And looking at all the numbers, I realized the might of Germany, because West Germany was number one in terms of economic development. Even the socialist East Germany, which had been separated from the West for so long, was somewhere around number 9 in economic development. And even though you say that the ideas I have expatiated upon in my work come from a French newspaper, people say that one of the driving forces of what I've read from my materials, one of the driving forces between this new European unification is actually England. Therefore, economically, Germany is the most mighty, and when it comes to the center of the European Union, well, we can't say France is the first one to pitch the idea. Therefore, a little bit of discussion discussion is dedicated to French dominance in the European sphere. Compared to that, Germany has become extremely upwardly mobile. It has developed in spectacular ways over the past few decades. And I think that there is no doubt that given the amazing statistics coming out of Germany, they will become the center of a new unification. They will become the center of a Europe that is unified again. Thank you. I understand your position. But these categorical conclusions that you said, you're looking at the economical side of the Union. What about the cultural side? If you think about that, then in your single European house, won't the role of France be worth more than a bit of discussion? Thank you for this. Thank you for this point, sir. Thank you. You are free. Now, Elena Ivanovna, your reviewer, will come and read her review of your dissertation. The topic that Adelaja Sunday has chosen for his dissertation stands out among others, not only because it has never been discussed or delved into on our Department of International Journalism, but also because it is very important. And it explores a monumental topic of the building of a single European house. So we have seen the strength of unions out of the socialist country that we are just leaving, and so Adelaja does well with highlighting all sides of an issue, be it political, economic, or social. He asks, is a new European unification a step forward or a step back into all these historical attempts at unifications we've seen? And he highlights the role of mass media in all the processes that he discusses, and he outlines a number of practical and theoretical steps of how the situation can play out in the future. He uses very good comparisons and quotes many literatures and even memoirs. Well, the first chapter, which is quite voluminous with 70 pages, leads us through history and tells us about the past attempts at European unifications. It feels like a work of several years. I really like the fourth section that talks about the role, the interaction between the press and the government. The author has exhibited great knowledge of his material. He shows that in his use of terminology and good organization of information, such as when he explains the concepts of stimulus and anti-stimulus well. The second chapter of his work is dedicated to the specific study of one publication. He tries to put the regional periodical that he quotes into a system. The author highlights that his main newspaper, International Communicative Weekly, in addition to political, social, economic events, also makes a big, emphasizes ethics and moral issues and social opinion. And that focus only helps support Adelaja's points in the building of a single European house, since the nations are the ones doing the building. All of the conclusions that are come to in this work are logically founded and well proven. If I have any criticism, it is that this work is pretty long, but that is not a criticism per se. Another one is tautology, because, for example, there are sentences like, "Now the time to realize the formerly unrealized hopes and plans into reality has arrived." However, these corrections are not very substantial. The author of this work has done a very good job, and I think that he should get A with distinction. I think he should get the highest mark for this work. Sunday, Adelaja, the last word goes to you. Please conclude with an attempt to counter the reviewer. I wonder what I can counter, though. She is about all of her criticisms. She's correct, because that is how it turned out. I think that her criticisms aren't too heavy. I don't think that they've made my work any less quality than it is. When you mentioned tautology, I want to say that was actually on purpose, because I wanted to show that the former attempts at European unification, which have all fallen through, will soon come to a more noble conclusion than before. And so all I have to say to my reviewer is thank you, and to all my professors, thank you. You've really helped me. You've made me into a specialist. And all of you people in my department, all of my teachers, all of the people who have worked with me, I am so extremely grateful to you because of all you've taught me. Thank you so much.